I have always lived in a world in which I am just a spot in history. My life is not the important point. I'm just part of the continuum. And that continuum, to me, is a marvelous thing. Sherry S. Tepper. Bending Not Breaking, Season 4, Episode 1. Welcome to Republic City. And welcome back to another episode of Bending Not Breaking. I'm Sunshine Mayfield.
And this is Ben Pruitt.
And we are excited, so excited.
It's a new season.
It's a brand new season.
This is the first one.
And we are diving in to Legend of Korra.
I've been waiting for this.
Book 1.
It's so good.
We've watched a lot of Korra now to prep for this.
So much Korra.
And y'all, this might be a divisive statement,
but
it's really good.
It's so good.
It's so good. And so I'm excited to chat about that. And I'm excited for this episode because this episode specifically, we've got a pretty awesome guest with us. Ben, who do we have with us today?
Y'all, I'm so excited. We have Andrew Slack joining us today, and this is the co-founder of Harry Potter Alliance. We have he's like a comedian, a performer by nature. He has co-authored a children's book called Save Santa's Home. He is just all around super cool, and so I want to just invite him and welcome him and say thank you for joining us. Andrew, thank you for being here. How are you today?
I'm doing well, and I'm so excited to be with you both. So thanks for having me.
Of course, yes.
Well, it means so much that you're spending time with us and taking time out of your busy day to be here with us and to talk about the Legend of Korra, which it's the underrated, probably becoming more like it's gotten some respect on its name over the years.
Yeah.
When it first came out, people were very like 50-50 on it. Hot and cold, right? So, and I think that hopefully time has only proved that it's still like pretty solid in what it is.
Absolutely.
And in some ways, I like it better than Avatar: The Last Airbender.
This is true.
In some ways, I like Avatar, but guess what? Here's the thing. We get to coexist with those feelings, and it's okay to just like both of them.
I agree.
So we're going to dive into this first episode. A lot of setup, a lot of exposition, but we're going to do it through a specific lens of continuity.
That's right.
And I only know that word as in like they put an orange soda down on the set and then a grape soda was there in the next shot and it's a continuity error. That's like the only context I have for continuity.
John Mayer album.
It's also a John Mayer album.
Actually, it's Continuum.
Yeah.
But anyway, Andrew, so you kind of prepared us by choosing this lens, and we kind of discussed it, but can you just give us, why did you choose continuity? Like, what were you thinking? What were the points you were thinking about when you chose continuity? What does continuity mean to you?
Oh boy. Well, first of all, this is the first episode that you all are exploring Korra, and as a handoff from your deep dive explorations into the world of Avatar. So it just felt like, well, why don't we talk about that transition? Because you all are engaging in a process of continuity right now, and so much of the series itself is grounded in continuity. There's the opening lines of this first episode. We have Tenzin talking, and he says that I'm just looking here. He says that Avatar Aang accomplished many remarkable things in his life, but sadly, his time in this world came to an end. And like the cycle of the seasons, the cycle of the Avatar began anew. When we look at the earlier series, we have similar quotes around searching for the Avatar, and some people believe that the Avatar was never reborn into the air nomads, and that the cycle is broken. But I haven't lost hope. I still believe that somehow the Avatar will return to save the world. So there is a common theme here around new seasons, around cycles continuing. And so the show invites us into that right away, understanding that this moment in the present that we're exploring with Korra is very much grounded in the past.
Yes, I'm so excited to dive into this conversation. There's so much there, and you've already lifted up several points that I really want to talk about. But before we do that, Sunshine's going to give us the 30-second recap.
It is not nice to start our brand new season with your filthy lies, and so
Sunshine's
it is your
going to give us
turn.
30 seconds
I
on the
did the
clock.
opening quote, which means it is your turn to do the recap.
Who
And this
says
is something that
that's
we've
the way it
done
had to be?
for 3 seasons.
I don't believe in this kind of continuity.
We're going to continue this continuity from previous seasons, and you are going to give us a 30-second recap.
Sunshine, you have 30 seconds on
your
the
mark,
clock.
get set, go.
Oh, God. Okay, so Tenzin gives us the rundown, and then the White Lotus finds super cute baby Korra, and then Korra's like, oh my God, 17, and masters firebending. And then Naga and Korra go for a stroll, and then Tenzin shows up with the fam, and there's like, oh my God, airbending children. And then there's airbenders. It's really cool. And then he can't stay because Korra decides to go to Republic City without permission, and then Katara blesses her journey, and then Korra's a stowaway, but she can't buy anything. Then she beats up a gang. She goes to jail. Tenzin gets her out, privilege. And then he kicks her out, and then,
3,
changes his mind, and then she gives
2,
a speech, and Amon accelerates his plans.
1.
That was pretty good, huh?
Yeah, you honestly, you kind of nailed it.
That might have been my best one ever.
It's almost like you pre-wrote it. Did you pre-write it? Did you cheat?
No.
You cheated?
No. I would never do
just
that.
using the resources at your disposal, I guess.
Yeah, who's to say that's cheating?
Me. I think you got to do it off the top of the dome.
Okay. I don't know about this. Andrew, you are welcome to attempt a 30-second recap. I mean, it's always fun to hear guests try. You don't have to do that, though, because most of our guests say no thank you.
Yeah, I'll do it. I don't know if I'm going to be good at it, but I'll do it.
This is great. I'm so excited for this.
30 seconds on the clock. Andrew,
on your mark,
get set, go.
The White Lotus visits a home and says, "What's going on?" And Korra's like, "Yo, I'm the Avatar, deal with it." And then we see her many years later, and she's doing awesome stuff, but she only has 3 elements down. She's not good at spiritual stuff, so she needs Tenzin. Tenzin comes like, "Sorry, no
15
dice.
seconds
I'm in
left.
Republic City. Deal with it." She goes and deals with it with Katura's blessing, goes to Republic City and sees a lot of crazy stuff, and then ends up convincing Tenzin to be part of her journey, and she's now on the hero's path.
3,
blah blah blah.
2, 1. Yeah.
Well done.
Well done.
You also covered things I missed, so that was awesome.
I skipped some important points though in that. There's a lot of that's a very hard thing to do. I've never tried to do that before.
Thank you for validating the difficulty of the 30-second recap. It's not easy.
No, that is not. No, and yeah, that's hard. Way to go.
Yeah.
So let's jump in again and let's highlight again continuity and what we were really looking through when we were kind of looking through this lens. The definition that I found was the unbroken or consistent existence or operation of something over a period of time. Was kind of the opening definition and lens that I kind of went through. And again, it's tough because before that it was just like do things in movies match up correctly? It was kind of like the lens that I have. And so to think about it as this understanding of this existence of anything throughout history or throughout a period of time. And so we, even when we're looking at kind of lifting up the legacy of the Avatar and what that really means, how that plays in a continuum. And we open straight into that, and I love the intro. Like the 30 seconds, the first 30 seconds of I'm Korra, I'm the Avatar, you got to deal with it. Because I feel like it's the creators kind of being like...
Yeah, Andrew, you nailed that, by the way.
This is where we're at. Like, we're here. You've got to deal with this new person being the Avatar because that's the way that this legacy works. And then even the next step of almost calling out like fans, but knowing that the reaction to Korra is going to be like a 50-50 reaction, where Katara's, man, she's powerful, and then White Lotus, she needs to learn restraint. And I feel like that's the
fandom.
That's the fandom of people being like, oh, she's the best, and people being like, she's too cocky. Yeah. I don't like her. So, yeah. But we get this understanding of this legacy of the Avatar and how it shifts from person to person, and that they each can provide value and have obstacles that they need to overcome when it comes to supporting the people around them. And those obstacles are going to be different.
Absolutely. Yes. And Korra's obstacles are so different from Aang's too. There's just a lot to be said for Korra's beginning. Just the first 30 seconds, first 2 minutes of the show. But yeah, so Andrew, what's a moment of continuity that you noticed?
Well, right away, I mean, there is. Okay, so just confession. I have watched Avatar: The Last Airbender one time, and it was a life-changing experience for me. But I did it in like I don't know, like 2014. So it's been 6 years or 7 years, and it's been staying with me. So I can't recite it as well as I'd love to. And I've never watched Korra before, but in preparation to talking to you guys, I just binged the first season, and that's all I have seen. In talking to you both, and so I'm in love with it. So I just want us to sort of just state that out to all the people who are listening as like an apology that I am not as well versed as you are, most likely. So if I say something ignorant, call me out on it on Twitter, at Andrew Slack, I guess. Just be like, yo, you don't know what you're talking about. But and I will agree probably. But the first thing, there's the opening sequence, obviously, that we see a continuous kind of theme. The announcement of the elements, the power of the elements. And I want to speak to that in a moment, but to sort of speak to a more like maybe banal version of continuity, I experienced a little shock when I started watching it, that it's like often when you see a series that is set, I mean, Aang is dead. The other most of the heroes from the first story are dead. I mean, Zuko is not Iroh is dead. Like all of these people that I came to love, they are dead. But Katara is not dead, and there was something kind of jolting to me about seeing her as an old woman when I just knew her as a very young woman.
Yeah.
And that was a little startling. And to know that she had this whole life and she has kids who are old, who have kids, it brought up the kind of feelings that I think I felt in watching The Force Awakens, when we see Princess Leia as older, and there's just been a whole life that's been lived, and a whole set of new problems and new things that have happened, and wonderful things that have happened. And most of those things I won't know about, I can only imagine. So that right away just felt really deep and powerful. And there was just something really powerful about seeing these elders in the White Lotus who are holding Korra back, but then Katara, with her independent streak, is pushing her forward. And that felt like an amazing passing of the baton.
Yeah, well, and it goes into what Katara says later in the episode too, where it's one of the things I really appreciate about Katara in this episode is when Korra's like, I have to leave, she's like, I know you do, and she just essentially delegates to the younger generation, saying it is time for those of us in this older generation to delegate, to let go. For the sake of continuity, for the sake of like knowing what is best for the future, is letting go of me taking charge and giving people a chance to do what she did when she was young, right? And I love the way you kind of spoke to this shock value of seeing Katara as old, because what I see there is when we are in relationship with people, and I very much believe that we were in relationship with Katara when we watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, that all of a sudden it's like there's a gap in the story that we like. I felt so close to you, and then you disappeared, and now you're older than I am. And how did that happen? Because we haven't had the opportunity. I feel like it'd be different if we were friends and then I had been at the same age Katara was when I watched it. Like there would be less of a continuity error, if you will, but instead seeing that gap is it's kind of jolting. I agree.
I mean,
I love.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead, Andrew.
No, please, you go ahead. Please.
I think for me is one of the things I love about this specific moment is how much it mirrors Katara's grandmother sending her off the first time.
Yes.
And so it still shows that legacy and connection through time, but also says like this is the start of a different story. But like it doesn't mean that the values and things that are still here don't still exist. It's just maybe not going to be the way you expect it to be. And so I really love that moment of Katara sending off Korra, because it felt like the start of Avatar again, and it just felt like there was a lot of connection there.
Yeah, that almost reminds me of a piece. It's almost like a piece of music that has a similar refrain, similar notes that they're playing, but they're playing it differently. And that's how life works. I mean, to speak to the jolting stuff, I'm 41, and I experience myself sometimes. I mean, 41 is not particularly old, but it's certainly not particularly young. And so, I look in the mirror and I sometimes very much recognize myself, and other times I don't. When I was actually, I experienced that when I was like 17. I didn't necessarily recognize myself because some part of me felt like, why am I not 4 anymore? Why am I not 3? It doesn't, I sometimes, I don't know if you've had this experience, but just like there are times where I don't really remember why I am in a different version of myself, because it seems like I should be in a, like I'll just remember something so deeply that it will feel like I'm still in that moment. I'm still 5, or I'm still 8, or whatever that age is. And it's very disorienting to know that I'm a different age. Um, and it takes a lot of work for, as I'm getting older, and faith and trust and some degree of patience when I see people making mistakes, but maybe I don't know, maybe they're not mistakes, to hand over the torch and the baton to younger generations, while also understanding what is the baton that I'm holding. And that process of aging is something that we must go through, and that is not easy. So Katara, I mean, very much in the spirit of water bending, is going with the flow, and
That's so true.
she's allowing for that. And then to speak to that concept of the flow of the elements and continuity in general, this entire world, the spiritual system behind this world is based in a very, very deep reverence for continuity. We have Tenzin talking about that there's a season to everything. I mean, certainly in Western theological traditions, we have to everything a season. In the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition, that is cited, and then but there also is just this earth, air, water, fire, like this idea of bringing together the 4 elements in a circle. We're not dealing with a show that has a worldview of a square. The worldview is a circle. And it's really important to respect that we're dealing with a text that is based in circles, and that there's a lot more to say about that, of course. But so when I'm thinking about continuity, I'm thinking about the power of a circle, and that any point in that circle is connected to every other point in that circle. So if I'm being 41, I could mourn being 17, but I can also recognize that somewhere I am still 17, and I am still a older age than I currently am. And I also am currently dead and currently not born. Like all of the things that have ever happened and will happen in the time continuum that I'm part of are all connected to each other in that circle.
Yeah, that really sheds light on something for me as I think about what you're talking about, and what I'm really focused on is the continuity of the Air Nation in this that we see in this episode, right? We see because Aang was the last Airbender, right, and he has had a family with Katara, and Tenzin is an Airbender, and now we see his children, and we see a bunch of Airbenders now that we see the Air Nation growing and becoming, and at one point that circle almost came to an end, right? And yet we were blessed with this continuity of seeing the biological continuity of those that can bend the element of air, preserving an entire culture. And I find that really compelling to think about, like what we see later in the series is just the burden that it puts on Tenzin to be responsible for an entire nation of airbenders. And what I love is that we get to see that, but it also gives us hope because we know that it's a circle and we'll see it continue on, and we have our entire history and we also have our entire future ahead of us. So I thought that was a really neat thing that you just lifted up. So I appreciate that.
One of the other things that I really enjoyed about what you're saying is this idea almost of the passing of the baton and what that means. And I think in this show, we're going to see a lot of things arise, whether it's the rise of the equalist and these movements that happen that seem like they come out of nowhere, but we know that that's not how continuums work. That things don't just arrive out of nothing. That it evolves and stems from things that have been underlying. But when we're talking about these movements that are growing, this idea around like, yes, I fought and saved the world when I was 12 years old. I can't do that anymore. I can be supportive of it. I can find ways to be an ally to that, but I can't be the one leading this fight. And I need to let people do that so that they can continue the good work and find ways to be supportive in it without being the center of it. And I think that that's a really cool moment for Katara as she's passing that baton.
Absolutely.
So there is something really, striking about this notion of Katara handing over the baton to a new leader. But what you're saying there is like there is such an act of leadership in doing that, and the leadership that I think we're called to do, and that the show is calling us to do, is to be a leader, is to go with the elements, to go with the cycle of life. And when we see the counter to that, those who are afraid to do that, we see Fire Lord Ozai, or Ozai. Am I saying his name right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. You're
okay.
Good.
Fire Lord Ozai is he is freezing on things. He doesn't. He only wants himself to be in charge. He wants to be in control. You can't be in charge of a circle. It's impossible. It is impossible to be in charge of a circle.
That's fascinating.
So
That's so interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
Please. Yeah, there's a whole theme of that, not only within this world, but in other myths as well. I mean, we see this with Palpatine in Star Wars. We see this with Voldemort in Harry Potter, who literally names himself. Voldemort in French means to flee from death. I mean, these are characters who make a choice that they see themselves as so separate from the continuity of life. And in doing that, they go to war with life. And there's an inevitability, it's almost fatalist, that they are going to lose because you cannot defeat the infinite circle, because you are not outside of it. Even if you think you are, you've rendered yourself insignificant by trying to be overly significant. Katara obviously intuitively understands that there is more to the world than just her. Normally, those who fight so hard to make it all about them don't really feel like they're very important and need to feel like they need to fill that gap. So this is a major theme in this series, I think, and then so many of the series and myths that we love.
Yeah, no, that's so like there's so much there. I feel like we could do a whole series on that concept. There's so much really neat information there that is really fascinating. And I think it's interesting that how we'll see that from the villains of Korra too, how we'll see that from Amon, and how we'll see that from the other villains that we'll see later in the series as well. Really, it's interesting to think about, because one of the things you lifted up was this leadership from Katara that I find really fascinating. And John Maxwell is a pretty significant author in the realm of leadership and leadership development. And one of his kind of tenets for leadership is that if someone can do something at least 80% as well as you can, that is when you should delegate it. Because it frees you to do other things, to lift your vision higher and your scope wider, but also it makes sure that you're training the next generation. And I think that's an interesting rule to kind of consider is if someone can do it 80% as well as you can, that means there's 20%. There's a lot of mistakes that can happen in 20%. Like if you listen to a music and put one mistake in it, it can ruin the piece of music, and that's just 1% of the music, right? So it's really fascinating to think about what that looks like, and being willing to delegate, being willing to accept that people will make mistakes. And I think that's exactly what the leadership that you're referencing from Katara. I do want to point us in another direction, though. I want to
point away.
Yeah, I want to kind of lift up a few things.
You know what they say about pointing, though?
No.
You got more fingers pointing back at yourself.
No, I'm using all 5 fingers to point.
You point with you're a whole hand pointer.
Nah, yeah, I'm pointing with my I'm gesturing. Maybe that's the better term.
Gesticulating.
Yeah, that's right. So one of the things that I really appreciate about this episode is that we see Korra go through a whole wide range of growth from being very
From being a
small,
baby.
from being a baby,
Just
to
a cute little tummy too, like the little pudgy baby.
Oh, it's perfect.
I wanted more time with Baby Korra.
Baby Korra
I
is
thought
too
that
powerful. Yeah.
Maybe that could be.
I found Baby Korra delightful.
Yeah, that could be a show, like Muppet Babies, a Baby Korra. There's like a whole room there.
I'm sure there's like a chibi version somewhere out there.
Could easily be a spinoff though for Nick Jr.
Oh, I'm so into it. Okay, sorry, that's we digress. But so one of the things I love about Korra's growth in this episode is that Korra's privilege is showing,
and gets checked,
and it's pretty blatant. And I want to kind of give us some chance to talk about this and talk about it through a sense of continuity. So, like one of the ways that I connected it was she's been sheltered her entire life. As soon as they found out that she was the Avatar, the White Lotus kind of came in and like guarded her and protected her and kept her in the South Pole and made sure she never left. And this kind of sheltered life doesn't necessarily lead to wisdom. And that's kind of my question is like she confronts the fact that there is, an equalist movement that doesn't, people who don't like bending. She's grown up being praised for her bending her entire life, and then comes to meet somebody for the first time that says bending is not okay, and she's like, what? And then she meets homeless people in Republic City, finds out that there's a lot of people that are homeless in Republic City. She finds out that she needs money to pay for things. She gets arrested. There's a lot that happens to her. And so I'm interested to hear what y'all's thoughts are and how that kind of relates to continuity. Because I think my question is that is it the natural progression of sheltering a child? Is the natural continuity of that ignorance? And if so, what's the remedy to it?
Yes.
Tell me more.
And the remedy, not shelter them. In fact, the remedy is just to fire hose information at them nonstop.
Is it?
No, it's not. But you're right? She gets her privilege checked throughout this episode. It points back to the time that Aang goes to Amashu for the first time after waking up from the iceberg.
That's exactly what I wrote.
And thrashing the town, even though they were just trying to have fun. And she's trying to do good, but thrashes the town in the process. And how much damage does she cause? But she's like, give me a pat on the back. I caught these 3 bad guys, quote unquote. And so you get these moments of anytime you are experiencing new cultures, new people, new learnings, you're gonna be better for it. And it's not necessarily her fault, right? Like, she's the White Lotus, kept her hidden. And so it says a lot about how processing and working through, I almost think of it as like when we try to keep kids from watching certain things. And there are some things that are just like, there's a lot of language or a lot of sex, and that's not what we don't need to be like showing all of that to children. But I also think of it as the idea of, being told, I grew up in a Baptist church, and, Harry Potter was not allowed because the witchcraft. They loved Lord of the Rings for the Gandalf, oh no, it's cool, he's a wizard, but he died and came back 3 days later, so that's allegorical, so that's fine. But, so I had a lot of problems with, even as a 5th grader, but this idea of you don't get access to this because we think it might harm you, versus this idea of let's talk through this, let's process this, this is information you're going to receive, let's work through it together, versus this nope, just don't, it doesn't exist, it's not a thing.
So Andrew, I have a question for you. In your work with social organizing and social justice work, I'm curious how this relates, because I want to kind of confront the continuity of this question. So there's this holistic reverence for the Avatar, right? And there's this continuity of the Avatar being this sacred being in this universe, right? And Aang was very revered. He was literally thought to be no more Avatar, right? And so he kind of destroyed property, paid no real price, and was kind of let free because of his position as the Avatar. And then we see it happen again with Korra. She was literally broke and wrecked this street and was arrested. But even still, because of the privilege that she has, and through Tenzin, was allowed to leave. And essentially it was equating it to almost paid bail, because he said, I will pay for the damages. And I'm curious, like, where is the line between, forgiveness for, people who ultimately are going to make a huge difference in the reality of this world, but also holding her accountable and holding Aang accountable even for these times where their acts of destruction are just kind of like not ignored but just released from them. And so like what the continuity of allowing that to continue to happen seems a little dirty to me. What are your
Damn,
thoughts on
that's a
that?
good question. Uh, I I'm struggling with the question. I mean, this is a question to struggle with. This is a tough question. Um, it- whew, I mean, this is tough. I mean, this is. I think the problem that I have though with the way like I'm totally in agreement about the points on privilege. I don't know if, and this may be a criticism I have, and I don't know that because I haven't. Does the show do a good enough job of presenting this? Like to me, like watching this, Korra going after the triad, like it felt pretty justified. I mean, they were using force against I mean, this was a situation where it did feel like, okay, yeah, she destroyed property, but like she should have called the police. It seems like it's pretty obvious that they weren't going to come in time. She was helping someone. So like I get the point on I don't know because there is a question there and there's a question to me about like the equalist cause, and I don't know if the season does an adequate job of really showing like, and maybe the season does, the series does, but I don't know if the season does because it ends up kind of folding into the story about Amon and like all of these problems with his worldview. But like, what about the legitimate points that he has? And I don't know if the show goes deep enough into that. So I'm not sure how to answer that honoring the text of the show. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, I think for me, as I think about applying that question to our lives, I think about who are we privileging in our own lives that just because
Mm.
of their history and the way that it has always quote been done, who is receiving that privilege that we need, like what are the systems that we need to put in place to ensure that that does not continue to happen. And so like I'm thinking specifically of
Sure.
race right here, so white people and white privilege for instance, like where we like I think there's a state that just said that there were I forget which one, but there's no bail now allowed in a state, which is no paid bail. And what that does is it like is addressing a social justice issue for the first time in a long, long time around that category. And I just think about like the history of being able to pay for things and being able to utilize money and power as privilege, and how we we need to create systems and operations that confront that
Yes.
continuity error, right? Because to me that is a continuity
Yes.
error, right? Not necessarily something that is like going from orange to purple soda, but rather a continuity error in the fact that we've allowed it to continue is an issue.
So the topic of privilege is it's something that look, I am a white man who is I have not always been economically privileged, but right now I am. And I am cisgender and I am heterosexual. And there are just so many blind spots that I have, things that I take for granted, things that I do, things that I can get away with that other people don't do, insensitivities that I commit without even knowing I commit them. Or when I do know, not feeling a high enough regard for that. That is something like just because I name myself an activist doesn't give me license to not explore that privilege. In fact, it invites me to explore it even more. So I think that's an absolute necessity. And but exploring one's privilege, exploring one's a place in the world is a verb, not a noun. It's not a static thing. It's something we have to continue
Mm.
around. And in fact, there are so many ways that we can view privilege. But I think from the point of, I'm going to tackle this question in a perhaps a different way through the prism of continuity, just because of that being the theme, with the caveat that as an individual, this is a constant challenge for me, and it is very difficult for me to look at where I've made missteps in my life and to mourn that and to
Same.
and to mourn that and to own it and to own a kind of shame and to be okay with shame, and to not mistake shame for badness, that there's some kind of inherent badness in me. I think that's where there's the kind of defensiveness and backlash that we see in people, to understand that we're all people.
Yeah.
And some of us are given certain privileges that we did not earn, and it's so important that we own that fact, without letting the guilt around that paralyze us. That is, and to freeze us. And on that note, I kind of want to, and I don't feel great about talking, like lecturing people about privilege right now, mainly because I'm exploring it myself. I am on my own journey with that. But I want to just, it's a very humbling topic. And I get nervous speaking about it in public, simply because I'm wrestling with it so much at this moment.
No, I love that you lift that up, because I often on this podcast have, after the episode is finished, I have been like, I really feel like weird about having that conversation, because I am not an expert, right? I don't have all the information. And whenever we speak about things that that are bigger than us, I feel like that becomes something where I'm like, oh, I'm pretty insecure here. So like, I think it's worth saying that honoring that insecurity is a part of this journey where we talk about tough stuff, right? I mean, Sunshine, do you feel similarly? Like,
I mean, absolutely. I think there's things that we're always going to get wrong, and experiences that we don't have. And so I really do appreciate when I'm able to learn from any empathetic missteps that might happen,
Yeah.
or some subtle acts of exclusion that might happen. Wanting to learn and challenge myself and be called out on that, because if someone is willing to call me out on a subtle act of inclusion like that, that means that person, there's a lot of care there.
yeah,
that
feedback
is
is a function of respect.
and that is something that a person does not have to give me. But if they're giving me the benefit of the doubt and calling me out on that, it is my responsibility to do my best to not make that subtle act of exclusion again, and to learn and to grow from that, and really push to make sure I'm not putting up walls, getting defensive, but taking that as a growth point.
Yeah, and one of the things I really value about this is it's when people start talking about, like, the humility that you're offering us, Andrew, is something that we really value. It's because it's that lack of humility that is what drives people like Ozai. It's what drives, quote, the villains, right? It's what drives the people who aren't able to put themselves in other people's shoes. And it's interesting to think about, like, how resentment builds us into that feeling, because, like, the equalist movement, for instance, is a continuation of a growing disparity between benders and non-benders. It didn't emerge with Amon. Amon is capitalizing on the feeling that has been present for years and growing over the years and creating more and more disparity. And we see that growth in the comics. I don't want to spoil the comic story, because hopefully we'll do them eventually, but
We'll get to them.
like where we are in Korra is a direct response to what has happened in the comics and what happened in Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that just honoring the fact that growing disparity and continued alienation of different groups is what leads to this.
Totally. And I think it's important that you're bringing up the equalist movement too, because we see, like, so there's I mean, it would be an understatement to suggest that Amon is problematic, right? I mean, like, he's right. So and yet the grievances that he's calling on around privilege seem very apparent, that people without bending privilege have been suffering, and they have real grievances. So and there's this story.
Absolutely.
And so we see that in the world, by the way. Like, we see movements all the time get co-opted by those who are highly manipulative and have their own personal dramas and traumas that they're playing out onto the world stage. A great example of that in fiction is the character of the narrator / Tyler Durden in Fight Club. He is playing out his unconscious trauma about his dad leaving him. That's a whole other story. We can go into that another time. But like that's like, and there are all of these men who mainly working class men who are attracted to him in Fight Club and in Project Mayhem. And we see this again and again. I mean, in the United States, the white working class and white poor populations in our country are generally a very oppressed population. But in that oppression, there is a wish to, on a tribal level, there's a fear of being socially displaced by an other. And normally that other is or people of color. And when you have that kind of fear, you're so easily manipulated by those who are acting in bad faith. And so with the KKK, the White Citizens Council is in many ways pulling the strings of the KKK. And that's not to remove agency of the KKK's many evils, of which it is an indescribable thing. But when we see the MAGA movement and we see Donald Trump and these Trump supporters and all of that, we are on some basic level seeing a kind of like what Amon is doing, what Hitler did, of taking people who are afraid, who have privileges, but also have their own set of oppressions that are real as well, and then manipulating them. I sometimes think about in Belfast during the what we weirdly call the Troubles, during the war in Northern Ireland. There were many Protestant men on docks in Belfast who were being treated terribly, even though they had the privilege over Catholic people. And these guys would go to the foreman and say that they're going to go on strike. And he would say, go ahead, because I got all those Catholics out there that would kill to be paid less than you're being paid. So what happens? They don't go on strike, and they resent the Catholics. This is the Hunger Games. This is the Hunger Games, right? And so what Amon is capitalizing on here is a real grievance, and then he's mutating that into something that becomes perverse. And we see that with his brother, who's now leading a movement against that, and is taking these draconian measures that are insane, that are absolutely insane. So there is a whole world of thinking there. And I want to pivot to a different point, although I want to give you a chance to respond to that.
Let's do it.
Because okay, cool.
I feel great.
This is related.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I don't feel great about all those things existing, but I feel good about the conversation.
Yeah, that's
right. Well, right.
Thank you.
Yeah. Clear that out.
And I
keep
say
Ben
all
in
that
check.
with the caveat again. Like, I am still a student of my privilege. I am still a student of this world that we live in that is just so utterly complicated, and just my own ignorances.
I love that language.
So I want to just sort of veer back, because we are now talking about our world, and sort of start with this basic principle that I have, which is that fantasy is not an escape from our world. It is an invitation to go deeper into it. So when
that is the premise of the podcast.
Right,
yeah, that is why we exist. I love that. That's so good.
We're exploring these things. We're exploring ourselves. Our stories are the metaphysical mirror by which we see ourselves, our relationships, our inner lives, our spiritual lives, our sociological, political lives, all of that. And so it's so useful. It's so important to explore these stories. They're such gems and jewels. And so to go to the story of continuity and privilege here that I'm seeing with Korra it's really, I'm struck by the fact that she's in the South Pole, which is a place of frozenness in the story, and hopefully will remain a place of frozenness in our world. But frozenness is really important because she's frozen. The White Lotus are keeping her frozen. They think they're keeping her safe. But they're not allowing her to grow. Whereas Katara, true to form as a waterbender, wants to see her go with the flow. And she sees that the flow is necessary in this episode for her to go to Republic City. And there's a kind of parable here to me about like Siddhartha Gautama's journey in becoming the Buddha, where he is shielded by his father and not able to see any of the pain and suffering in the world. He's kept in a very walled environment. And it's only when he leaves and escapes that he finds out that there are versions of suffering he was not aware of. And what a shock it is for Katara, for Korra, what a shock it is for Korra to hear the first equalist denounce her for bending. It is like, it goes against every story she's ever heard. Her entire life, she has been told how important benders are, how important she is. It legitimately makes no sense to her. There is no one I can imagine that in hearing this for the first time, if you were raised by Korra, but like Korra, in this frozen environment, the symbolism of being frozen, that you could ever imagine that there's another model of reality. This is a jolting, difficult experience. Just very hard. And I think that's something that many people experience when we learn about privilege. It's like, but I didn't mean to do any harm. I didn't write this. I didn't mean to. And there's a differentiation. It's like, well, yeah, you didn't mean to do harm. And in fact, you yourself didn't, but there's a larger story at play that you're playing into. And so then there is this other question, which is the project that I've dedicated myself to, that is sort of behind the scenes. I call Imagine Better Stories. And we need to imagine better stories. If we don't, the world will imagine worse stories. And to speak to continuity, one of my heroes is Brian Stevenson at the Equal Just at EGI. Yes,
a worthy choice.
He speaks a lot about just the way in which it was very powerful for me to hear him talk about in an interview with Ezra Klein. Ezra is Jewish, and I am Jewish, and Ezra was saying how he was doing a story in I don't remember why he was doing a story, but in Berlin, and he had an anxiety attack, a panic attack, and he didn't understand why he was having it, and he realized, oh, it's because I heard a loud German voice in German that was delivering orders, just instructions. But it brought up this feeling of every movie he had seen growing up on the Holocaust and the pain of this, just the fear that someone was trying to kill him as a Jew. And then he said, but that was just an experience I had. What is it like to be African American? To be a Black person in the U.S. and to be driving on Robert E. Lee Highway. It's not just it's not only erasing, it is abusive. You go through Germany, Ezra had that experience. I had that when I was in Germany a bit, but I was so amazed by Germany. I was so amazed walking around Berlin and the neighborhood that I was staying in a couple of years ago, that there were plaques in the sidewalk that named the home, in front of the home. And these are people who live in homes, who walk out of their homes and they see these plaques that mark that a Jewish person lived here, a family lived here, and they were taken out, and all of their things were taken out, and their lives were shattered. Many of them were killed after being slaves in concentration camps, making the Third Reich powerful through their enslavement. Germany has done something that is unbelievable, which is that it owns its shame. Not perfectly. No country does this perfectly. But Stevenson's point here is that Germany has taken very, very decisive steps to do that. South Africa, for all its many flaws, has taken steps to do that. Rwanda, again, for all its many flaws, has taken steps to look at its own history of the 1994 genocide, really own that. The United States,
and it's something we desperately need.
The United States,
in the United
yes,
States.
has done a horrible job. I mean, like, pitiful job at this. The idea that there is no Adolf Hitler statue in Germany outside of maybe like within a museum or a context. There's nothing that celebrates Adolf Hitler in Germany, at least that's state sanctioned. There's no highways, autobahns. There's nothing named after Himmler or Goebbels or any of that kind of thing. So why is it even close to permissible to have Robert E. Lee Highway? That is insane. And the feelings that Ezra was experiencing being in Berlin and hearing that German voice, but he was actually in a society that owned that. And if he went up to a German person and told them, they would know enough to understand why he might feel that. Not all German people, but enough, a critical mass. And within the US, we don't have that. We don't have that for people of color. We are imagining worse stories, truly and actively. So we need to be doing a better job there.
And one of the things that there's so much you're lifting up here that is like, oh my goodness, I want to read all the books, especially Bryan Stevenson's. I have yet to read it, but I've seen several of his talks. But one of the things I really appreciate about all of this is you're just addressing so many different things that Korra in and of itself, over its 4 seasons, gives light to. It addresses these things, right? It addresses so much. And one of the things, like, there are so many things we didn't have a chance to talk about in this episode because of time, but like we didn't get a chance to talk about like the growing of the police force and what that police force looks like, and Toph becoming a police chief's officer, and then her daughter becoming a police chief after her. We didn't talk about several things that deserve a lot of time and energy, but unfortunately we are running out of it.
I wanted to
make another point. Damn it.
Go ahead.
But
no, there's and lifting up, because we see the statues. The statues are focused heavily in this first episode of Aang and of Toph, and we see the meaning that they hold for Tenzin and Korra as they're walking by. But to also put that in a perspective of what does that mean to live in a city where you have this massive Aang statue if you feel like Benders have been taking advantage of you or harming you.
Or of Toph, when the police force uses metal bending as a form of like the use of force is not acceptable when it comes to the amount of metal bending they do to apprehend their fugitives.
And just
right.
on that,
go ahead, because for me it's the power of just like, what do the statues mean? Like, what do they hold, and the meaning they hold when it comes to the legacy that's being brought up over this continuum of time.
We have we have a task to do now about imagining better stories in the US. And that in Korra's world, they have a task to do that. Obviously, Amon is not just coming out of thin air. And Donald Trump's propaganda, I'm going to get a little dicey here, but I think it's important to make this point. His nativism, all of the insane things that he has done over the course of the last 4 years, that doesn't come out of nowhere. I mean, these are forces and they're forces that start in the founding of the U.S. We are the home of the home of the free and the land of the slave, and we've been competing with that dynamic this entire time of the U.S.'s history. We are, the America that I believe in is the America that, as Lin-Manuel Miranda calls it in Hamilton, America, you great unfinished symphony. So what we need to sort of look at here is how slavery mutates like a many-headed hydra. It mutates into Jim Crow. And Jim Crow, by the time that Jim Crow officially ends in 1965 with the Civil Rights Act, by 1968, the Republican political strategist Lee Atwater said that we do not need to use the N-word anymore. Yeah. When he developed the Southern Strategy and built the Republican Party in its modern form, he said we do not need to say the N-word when we can simply say tax cuts. And white working class people, frankly, needed social programs, but they will subconsciously understand that we're still saying the N-word. So all of this talk of tax cuts are signals. They are dog whistles. We have a whole party that was built in the late 60s on the continuation of slavery, continuing into Jim Crow, continuing into now. That is the continuity that we are talking about. So this idea of these statues that are up, and we need to honor these great generals who were defending the institution of slavery. No, not okay. The notion that we have July 4th, but we don't honor the other Independence Day of Juneteenth, of June 19th, that celebrates the end of slavery and mourning that it ever existed. We need to have that. We need to have a kind of ritual where we connect Juneteenth to July 4th. They're only 2 weeks apart. And think about it as the days of liberation. Think about it as that America is always becoming. So this is the process of imagining better stories, because we don't want a world where our children are shocked by like, oh wait, we don't need to freeze them. We don't need to shame them. We can own the shame collectively without putting it on people individually. Here. There's a huge difference there. And Korra having that wake-up call, it's really important when she is shocked. But she should have been instructed about this earlier. She should have been told these stories. She should have understood that. It's part of her responsibility in the role that she has. It's part of all of our responsibilities as Americans, as human beings, to really understand the context that we are working in and the story that we are trying to make into our society. That dream of Dr. King can only be fulfilled or moved towards unless we own our past. The past, the present, and the future are all connected. So in terms of the continuity here, that's that continuity. And ultimately, when we need our help, a friend of mine likes to talk about how, yes, we carry the trauma of our ancestors, but we also carry their resilience. And of course, in Korra, we see that resilience. We see that when Korra, by the end of this season, is needing help and is broken and is looking into the abyss and thinking of the unimaginable, of presumably of suicide. And that's when Aang comes to her after she resists the suicide, after she cries, and Aang appears, and she thinks it's Tenzin, and she shoos him away, and she says, Aang, and he says, when we hit our lowest point, we are open to the greatest change. It's not only that moment, it's the moment that all of a sudden, all of the avatars of the past are there with her. There is the continuity, is that we are standing on the shoulders of giants, of so many people that have come before us, and of where those people came from. We are life. We are life. I look into myself and my body, and I am made up of, you are made up of, all the people listening to this are made up of the most resilient forms of life. Yes, we are in a sixth mass extinction, but think about that. The life that we are right now has survived 5 mass extinctions. We are resilient. And before that, we came from stardust. This is ancient. It's real. It is similar to Aang and all the past avatars. We come from the sun. We come from many suns. This is science, and it's spiritual at the same time. And it's so important that we tell that story both in our political history and the biological and geological and astronomical one, to really ground ourselves in that. So sorry for my rant. I just wanted to get all that in, and maybe that was too much.
No, that's a perfect place for us to wrap, and that's a perfect place for us to wrap this portion. We are going to take a quick break, and then we will jump back in with our devotion and our gratitude for the end of the episode, and so we'll get to talk about that. So we'll be right back.
Awesome, everyone. Welcome back to this next couple of segments. We have a nice musical interlude for everyone, but for now, what I want to do is, since this is the first episode of the new season, for those of you who might just be joining us for the first time, what we do at the end of our episode is we do a thing called a devotion, and in that devotion, what we do is we combine one of the elements from the Avatar cycle with the lens we discussed, and what we try to do with that is set an intention for the coming week, a goal, an intention, something to think about, and we want to just help ourselves grow based off of the conversation we had. And so for this week, we are starting the Avatar cycle with water, and what we're going to do is we're going to talk about water and continuity and figure out how we can set a goal. So Sunshine, tell me about your intention, your goal for the coming week.
Yeah, for me, I think about water as like this ultimate filtration system, and somehow in its original form, in a certain place down the river, it can be contaminated, but over time it cleans and works its way until you have this pure drinkable water. And how it's this kind of solvent that can filter through things. And so I almost kind of view our previous conversation through that lens of, how do I take what is dirty, might not be the trouble past, the history of America, the things that I still need to learn about, and use myself as a way to learn, filter, process, and then be supportive of what we can do to help clean that and create drinkable water in the future.
I love that.
And so that's kind of my intention, is what can I do to continue to learn about the past so that we can make it a cleaner future.
No, I think that's beautiful. That's actually pretty similar to mine. When Andrew was talking earlier about the circle and how there really is no beginning and how it never ends and the power of the circle, I was thinking about well, that kind of lifted my eyes to like the water cycle, right? And so how water transitions from the ocean to the sky to the clouds and then rains and then drops from snow, etc. The cycle, and I find that really comforting because even though, as you say, this water might get tainted at some point, when it evaporates, it becomes more of its pure water self. And right, but at the same time, sometimes it will rain, and because of the air and the atmosphere, it has nothing to do with the water itself. It has to do with the atmosphere and the outside contributors, right? But it will turn into acid rain when it falls, and there's a lot of ways that this water can be contaminated, if you will. And so what I'm kind of doing is thinking about, in a similar vein to you, like observing where the water is, where is the point in the cycle at which the water is being contaminated, and what do I need to do to address that, and what are the steps that I can take as one individual in a very large world to ask that question and to start taking action to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to marinate on that this week. I'm going to be really thinking about it, and I'm going to think about what are the things that I need to do in order to make that happen. So that's my intention. Andrew, we want to invite you to do the same. Do you feel able and willing to join us in this practice?
I'm feeling a flood right now of what I want. Yeah.
But
it's very corny. I'm thinking of how in we're we're talking about history here, and my friend Valerie Kaur, who wrote this amazing book that people should check out. It's called See No Stranger. It's just so eye-opening, and she talks about how if you look at history as a linear project, then American history has certainly gone backwards, just so backwards in horrible ways. But if you look at it as labor, as an act of labor, then you see it differently, because labor, when we're being born, it works in a series of contractions and expansions. So so in that process, we're right on schedule. We are deeply being born right now. And Valerie talks, she asks about the darkness that we're in these times, with the pandemic and disinformation and white supremacy becoming more powerful, and also all of that, and asks, is this darkness the darkness of the tomb or the darkness of the womb? So if it is the darkness of the womb, if we allow it to be, then we have to embrace labor. So as I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about how labor begins with the water. We call it a woman's water breaking, and I think America's water broke, and I think that we're experiencing that right now. I happen to have a loved one who has COVID right now, and as scary as that is, I want to see all of this as part of a process of labor, that all of our lives are part of this process of becoming born. And even when it looks like we're taking 3 steps backwards, it's actually not that simple. It's all part of a fluid, watering, flowing process of ourselves being born and helping to give birth to a new world.
That's beautiful. That is, I love the imagery there. I want that book now. What is the title?
It's called
one more time?
See No Stranger, and it's by Valerie Kaur.
No Stranger.
And she has a TED Talk. You can look her up. She has called about revolutionary love. If you put that into YouTube, revolutionary love, and it is just incredible.
Yeah, I'm into it. That is my new goal. Changing it. I want to read that. That's my new goal. Okay, so that kind of brings us to our final segment, which is of gratitude, and frankly, it's my favorite segment. I know I shouldn't have favorites, but it is what it is. I like favorites.
We'll start it off then. Go ahead and jump in. Who are you being grateful for this episode?
Yeah. And just a reminder for, again, first-time listeners that are joining us for Korra, what we do for this segment is we pick a character from the episode that we are grateful for, who is someone that has taught us something, who has given us a new perspective, who has just been really cool, you really appreciate them, whatever it may be, something that has lifted the feeling of gratitude for you. And so for me, y'all, I'm picking Tenzin. Tenzin, over the course of this whole series, but also especially in this episode, we see Tenzin willing to change his mind. The capacity to change and to make a decision and then change your mind is something that, frankly, I'm not always great at. I'm somewhat stubborn, but I see Tenzin constantly evaluating his decisions and making choices around what, like, he was sending Korra away, then he's like, no, I'm going to change my mind, I want you to stay. And just the fact that he's constantly evaluating and thinking makes me really grateful for Tenzin. So that's my choice. I'm choosing Tenzin. Sunshine, what about you?
I'm going Katara.
Good choice.
Yeah,
Tell me more.
I think so. Oh, I gotta dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
No, I think I love the strength that she provides. I love the wisdom that she provides. I love that she's willing to challenge the White Lotus in their perceptions and the way that they have ideas around Korra. And I love the way that she's able to kind of say, Korra, you need to go. This is a fight that you need to be a part of and one that you need to take. And I just appreciate her being that sound wisdom, and I love the way that she greets Tenzin and the family when they show up to the South Pole, and everything about Katara in this episode is one that I'm just like, the person I hope that I am at the age of 90, whatever,
yeah,
however old she is, but a lot of gratitude for Katara. Andrew, what about you?
I'm just going to go with the title character of Korra, and and to speak to the continuity here, it's like, what a change from Aang. Like, just she also is the Avatar, and she is an other facet of the Avatar. Aang had this kind of kindness, humility, innocence to him, and so does Korra, but in a very different way, in this unapologetically fierce way. She needs that air that that Aang has, that these spiritual qualities that Aang has so naturally. I like that she needs it. It reminds me to aspects of myself and of so many people that I admire. She's no pun intended. She's a force of nature. I'm the Avatar. Deal with it. She is unapologetically ready, even when she's not ready. She's just going to jump into it. And yeah, you need to grow. You need to be humble, and you need all of that. But you also need that unapologetic force of, like, I am going to get this done. Even if I have to kick down every door, even if I have to say no to my future mentor, Tenzin, I'm going to say, no, you're wrong. You're wrong. I'm going to do this. And it's that sort of just like relentless love for learning and life and pushing that is, while flawed, is something that is a force that we all need inside of us to learn from.
I love it. Yeah, this is just, what a rich series. I can't wait to get to the rest of it. What a rich episode this was. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. This has just been incredible. For everyone listening, we are grateful you've joined us for Korra. Hopefully you'll continue listening, but know that you can also find more content on BNB_pod, and that's on Instagram, Twitter. You can find us on Facebook, TikTok. We have all the things. Support us on Patreon at BNB_pod.
Yeah, get yourself some bonus episodes. Maybe a little Facebook group, live episodes sometimes. That's right.
Yeah, join us. We want to hear from you. Give us some feedback. Send us a recording of your 30-second recap or thoughts on the episode or a moment that you thought Avatar was super cool and something you really learned. Any of the above. Keep it under 2 minutes, but send it to thearchofe@gmail.com.
Andrew, where can we find all of your stuff? Where's all the stuff if we want to learn more about you?
You can go to SaveSantasHome.us for my project, Save Santa's Home. I work at an organization that I'm not representing here, but I work there, Avaz. You can go to avaz.org to check us out, avaaz.org. Find me on Twitter at Andrew Slack. And do a lot of writing publicly on Facebook, a lot of just stream of consciousness. Facebook.com/Andrew Craig Slack. And I just want to thank you all. I'm really excited to be witnessing and part of this transition as you move into Korra, and thanking the audience here, this community you have for making such an incredible set of conversations happen and come into life. So thank you both.
Yeah, thank you. We're grateful for our listeners and supporters as well. They make all the difference.
This has been a wonderful episode. I'm Sunshine Mayfield.
This is Ben Pruitt.
And this has been Bending Not Breaking. Thank you for listening.
Bye-bye.